Our first question is, how did you guys individually get into filmmaking?
I'll start since I was the first. I was very interested in photography when I was in college. And, this was a long time ago when there were programs on public television, but there wasn't really very much documentary around. And I liked what I had seen, so I did some I did some research. I had to use books. There was no internet then, and found out about a few graduate film programs that dealt with how to make films, and not Hollywood films, but actually educational films. So I applied a couple of places, got into the program at Stanford, which was sort of a documentary journalism program, and I went there, and I got a master's degree. But at that point, documentary was also changing a lot, so it was becoming a lot more artistic. It wasn't just journalism, you know what I mean? So ever since that time, I started working in the industry, started making films, met John while I was in film school, and then he can tell you how he got involved.
Well, at that point, I was in law school, and actually, I met Chris I met Chris, and then I found out more about what she was doing with films because some friends and I were trying to raise money for a legal aid project at a prison down in Soledad. And so I had this bright idea of showing a movie, but I had the faintest idea how to do that. So I called up this film student I'd met named Chris, and so we showed The Harder They Come, which I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's a great reggae film. Anyway, and so we eventually got married, and I practiced law for a while, and then I quit it, and she was having much more fun doing what she was doing. So I ended up sort of getting an introduction from her on a film a commissioned film she shot in Alaska. And so gradually we made a film in around 1880 or 1989 or something like that. We made a short film, and then gradually over the years, I started working, doing sound recording, and then I ended up doing editing for a while. Chris's day job was teaching, and then in between we'd make short films and some longer films over the years.
And just to finish that off, I'm retired from my teaching job. I was a professor at Stanford, and John retired from editing, so now we have time to make films, which is how we were able to go to Sweden.
So following up, what are the advantages and disadvantages of working independently as a small team?
Well, I'll say a couple things about it. First of all, in general, we didn't have to struggle with trying to get financing. A combination of having a small operation and actually making shorter films meant that we could just get an idea and go out and make them. We would occasionally get small grants, but it was nothing like particularly what you need to do these days in terms of coming up with some serious funding. Another advantage to being a small crew is it enabled us to do things that other film crews maybe couldn't do. Like, for example, the last film we made, it was just the two of us in these, tiny refugee apartments. We couldn't do that with like a gaffer and an assistant and two sound people. I mean, you couldn't walk into these apartments with 5 people. You just simply couldn't do it. And then the other thing is because there were a self-contained crew of 2, just 2 filmmakers doing everything, we had time on our side. Which was needed in this film, we could just wait for things to happen. We could just actually spend like 3 or 4 days in Sweden and wait for something we knew was going to happen, and then arrange to do some filming. And if we had to stash a camera crew and a lighting crew and a grip truck at some motel and wait for the opportunity to shoot, it just wouldn't work. So that was another big advantage.
I would say that the world of documentary filmmaking, and I've seen this because I was a teacher for so long, the capacity to go out and make a film has really changed. It's gotten much, much harder, and it's also gotten much, much easier, depending on the route that you choose. So if you are going to make a feature film with full-up graphics and a major crew and so forth, you need to raise a few $1 million. There's just no way around it. And so people spend upwards of 10 or 12 years doing that. And at the end, they have the opportunity to put that into film festivals, to sell it, to do what they would love to do, which is to have a lot of success. But that doesn't always happen. So sometimes people work 10 or 12 years to to make a feature film for which quite a lot of money has been raised, and it does not get seen that widely, which is very sad. The other way, the cheaper route, is our route, which is the, kind of family, the homegrown route, where we both worked all the time at jobs. So we had, we took our savings and we bought a camera, we bought equipment so that we ourselves could do it. And then you don't need this upfront money. When we were going off to Sweden, we rented out our house. And that money helped pay for our travel to Sweden to get started on the film. And then once you start on something and you have something to show people, and you've edited a funding clip, then you can get little bits of money here and there. And the whole snowball starts to happen. So there's a couple of different things, but documentary has expanded so much. As you probably know, there's so much out there now. And it's become a high stakes game, but you can still do it with low stakes.
We did this last film in about 16 months, and it is shorter, but it's still 40 minutes and took a lot of time. But we could move a lot more quickly than a lot of people could. Of course, we got very fortunate because we had a little grant, and then we got another little grant, and then we got another little grant, and then right at the end, we hooked up with Netflix, which enabled us to finish up the film.
Awesome. So this is just a little bit more of a general question.
Sure.
And it's, what's something you wish you knew before you started getting into filmmaking?
That's a very interesting question. And of course, if I was getting into filmmaking now, I would probably be asking a different question than when I was younger, because there were so many fewer people making documentary films that it wasn't as competitive. I think now I would be saying, what is something that what kind of a story can I tell that somebody else can't? Either something in my experience, something in the way I look at the world, some little piece of a story that you found that nobody else has found. What have I got that's unique that I can bring into this world? Because there's far too many people making films about not very much. So I think that would be the question I would ask myself.
I think I would just add that I'm glad I didn't know some things, because I think we would have been a little daunted by the kind of things you need to put together to have high production values, or what I thought you would need to put together to have high production values. I think the fact that I think films need to have to look better and have higher resolution, and better this and better that now than they did before. Things could be a little rougher around the edges, I think, in the past, but now there's so much pressure to make everything so polished. I'm just sort of glad that we didn't get intimidated by I think thinking that we needed to do things a certain way without realizing that we could do them a different way. It wasn't because of any great choice we made. We just didn't. Chris knew more than I did on this because she'd been in film school and all that, but I think that helped, that we just went out and did it.
Well, can I just add to that, though, that nowadays there are people working with cell phones, and what could be a lower technology than that? But what I'm noticing is that I'm not seeing that work on the screen. I'm not seeing that work at film festivals. Only in a couple of instances where that was the only way you could get that material. Then it works. But I think John's right that ultimately people are kind of looking for things to look good, and it doesn't come too cheaply.
Yeah, cell phone. Yes, people do some things on cell phones, but it's almost a gimmick. I think that it doesn't. I think that the requirement, everything is changing so much with the streaming services and everything else that, and the increase in the changes in technology, that I think there's more of a demand on filmmakers producing a certain kind of film now, which makes it really difficult. Like HDR, as you probably know, is coming in, and that's going to be much more of an impact, I think, than like 4K did when it came in over HD. I'm assuming you know HDR. Chris is saying maybe I should, high dynamic range.
Is that something in your?
Have you run into HDR, high dynamic range?
Okay,
you know about it.
Okay.
Anyway, I think that is going to make a big difference, but that requires, probably bigger sensors, fancier cameras, and that just sort of goes into the pot with all this other stuff that increases the demands on filmmakers. And I hope that some filmmakers, like we shot HD, everybody was saying, you got to shoot 4K. And we talked to our post guy, and he said, no, shoot HD, it looks great. We've got a great camera, a great sensor. And so that was good advice. But the thing is, though, the pressure is still growing to use the higher resolutions, the higher dynamic range, the bigger sensors, and that makes it harder and harder to do films, which circles back to the requirements for bigger budgets. And then you have to spend more time raising the money, and so you just have to find a way to do it on the low, find a way to do it the way you need to do it to get it done, rather than spend 10 years of your life, fruitlessly looking for money. Or maybe not fruitlessly looking for money, but 10 years, even if it's a success, it's 10 years.
All right, so now we're going to switch gears a little bit to Life Overtakes Me.
Okay.
And then can you guys just give us a brief timeline of the project? Like, when did it start? How long did you shoot? And then, like, how many times you had to go to Sweden and stuff like that?
So we heard about this syndrome that afflicts these children in an article that we read. And we were so struck by it that we just thought, oh my God, are we actually living in a world where children are so traumatized they have to withdraw from life? Has it come to that point? What does that say about the kind of people we have on Earth? I mean, this is just horrible. So, of course, a lot of people read that article. And so, like many other people, we contacted one of the doctors featured in the article, and she wrote back and said, thank you for writing. I'm totally overwhelmed. There's too many people contacting me. I'm getting contacted by news outlets and
go away.
Big companies and little companies and National Geographic, and you're some kind of independent arty thing. What is that? And she says, I'm just going to have to think about this, and we'll maybe get back to it. Frankly, we thought we may never hear from her again. And then, quite unexpectedly, we heard from her. And she said, well, you could come over and meet with, we asked if we could come over and meet with her. She said, yes, you can come and you can stay for a few days and stay with me and my husband. So I went, and it was obviously a little bit, it's one of those leaps of faith you have to make, because I literally got off of a local train in rural Sweden in a village onto the platform of the train station. I don't know what these people look like. I don't even know if they're going to be there. I don't speak Swedish. They were there, fortunately, and so everything unfolded properly. But you just have to kind of believe. We got along very well. They took me to meet several families whose children have resignation syndrome or who have gotten better. And then I flew back home and said to John, I mean, just as we had thought, this seems like a very important topic. So we let them know that we were serious about this, and gradually, very, very slowly, maybe over the next 2 months, we waited, and finally they got back and said, yes, you can come. You have permission to come, and we'll connect you with a family. Of course, we wanted more than one family, but you take what you can get. So we
start somewhere.
We rented out the house pretty fast and left and went to Sweden. And over the course of the next, I would say, 10 months, maybe almost a year, we were in Sweden 5 times for a total of about 100 days. And we gradually were able to add a second family, and then closer to the end, a third family, so that our last filming trip, we actually were doing the very ending, which was what happens to each of these families after a year, which you saw. And then our edit room is just over there. And, so you were basically living and breathing the editing all the time. And we did that. It came together pretty quickly so that we were able to, when this opportunity to show a cut to Netflix occurred, we were ready and able to go and do that. And then they came on board. And then we thought, okay, now we can apply to Sundance. Now we can get going. Now we can set up all these finishing things, which are very expensive. And we made all of our deadlines and finished and went to Sundance for the premiere.
I would add one thing, and that's that it was interesting that after we made this overture that was sort of rebuffed because there's too many people, and then when Chris went and did the reconnoiter, it gave us some time in all that period to think about, first of all, did we want to make this film? And we decided that it was a really good way to make people, an audience, think about refugees and the trauma of being a refugee. Because it's a small story, but in every documentary you want to find a small story that tells a larger story. And we thought this really might work as that little story, that's very graphic. These kids are out cold. I mean, it's really a sort of a powerful thing. In other places people are stressed out. They don't look as obviously stressed out. They may look stressed, but I mean, these kids are out. So we thought, yes, that might work. And then the other thing we could do before we got into the filming is we thought, well, one problem with this is it's not very cinematic. I mean, the subjects of the film are lying down and they don't move. How do we turn this to our advantage? How do we tell a story that's set largely inside little apartments with people who do, in each family, they do pretty much the same thing for their kid, trying to keep them alive, but also keep them limber and, exercised. So that gave us time with this slow start until we really started moving quickly to think about how we wanted to shoot the film. But we spent a lot of time at that point, sort of looking at other films and talking about it endlessly and just thinking about an approach. And the film, in a lot of ways, I think, has traditional elements, traditional cinematic elements, but they're all intended. I mean, we thought very carefully about an aesthetic approach, and the way we made the film is very intentional, very, very, very thought through.
This is kind of a follow-up of the question about the choices that you were making. We were discussing in class, and we noticed that whenever you use voiceover of journalists and people who weren't part of the family, you use like a landscape and just kind of remove, or you didn't see the person who was providing the voice. What was the intention or like the incentive behind that?
Well, that was a very big decision for the film, because as you can imagine, there's a lot of different opinions about what causes this illness and how do you treat it, and there's nobody that has the definitive answer. And so in the film, you don't get the definitive answer. But if we had taken our camera and interviewed all of those doctors in their white coats, there would have been this big divide between the families and these medical professionals. And we just did not want our film to put the families in that situation. We wanted them to be the empowered people. They're the ones that are dealing with this problem. Other people may have theories, but they're the people that every day for 24 hours a day are living with this torture. So we decided the only people we would film on camera, talking to camera, were the parents. They're the only ones. And that for the medical people, we would film them only on audio. We would record only the audio and not even bring the camera. We cannot tell you how hard this is as a filmmaker. You always want to have choices. So normally the choice would be you shoot them in their white coat at their desk, and you get the audio, and you can go either way. You can use both, or you can cut out the picture. Well, we didn't do that, and I think it was good we didn't, because then we really had made that decision.
We said, we were saying, well, maybe we should shoot them just in case.
And we decided,
and then we just said, let's just make the choice now. And so we didn't, so we had no choice but to do audio only once we did that.
And then we
didn't have any picture.
And then we were left with the situation of, well, what images do you put this over? Because you don't really want to have the doctors over the families doing things. There's at least one occasion where that happens, but it's a very low stress scene where there's not a lot of action, so it works. But we had made the acquaintanceship of a cinematographer, and he shoots incredible drone photography. He's Swedish, and even though drone cinematography, we think of it as a cliche. It's way, 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 way overused. There was something about the way he shot them that felt special. And so we talked to him and made an arrangement to license some of his shots. And we were able to pick.
He actually shot some for us.
Yes, we commissioned him also to shoot some things. And it made all the difference because it gave the audiences a chance to just rest, look at this cinematography and listen. And then we go back into the families. And so it became a device that was really, really useful for us.
And the other thing, too, is we thought it really worked. And again, I think many times we're repeating what we may have said at the screening, but we felt that it really gave us a chance to get out of these apartments, these claustrophobic apartments, and remind the viewer that we're in this big, huge, beautiful country, which has all this wildness. You know, it was like a complete contrast between the people in these little tiny apartments and then out in these vast expanses out in the Swedish countryside. But you'll notice that none of those shots, except for the very last one, shows people or anything like that. There's a building in the background, but it's just
empty.
It's just empty because it's just nature. And we went to a shot of Stockholm at the very end because that was where we were tying up the film to remind people this is taking place in a country where there's a government and there are policies that affect everything that we've just seen. But also, like Chris was saying, we were thinking about putting those voices under things. I remember Chris told me something she used to say to her students was that if you've got what you could call hot words, you put it over cold visuals. Maybe you've heard such a thing. And the idea is that you don't want to have picture distract from listening to what someone's saying. And then sometimes you don't want vice versa. If there's something important happening, you don't want to have people jabbering over it. It'll distract people. So when we chose the few times when a person has VO underneath an image, it's not the most powerful or emotional important VO. It's like maybe a small piece. But the stuff under the drone footage is meant to be, the important stuff where the picture will be, sort of like steady state, or not really steady state, but sort of like, quiet, not quiet, in terms of movement and that sort of thing, so that you could just listen. The whole point was to give people a chance to listen.
One last question, and it's, what do you hope will be the impact of this film in like Sweden and in America, and I guess everywhere else it's shown?
Yeah. It's interesting you're mentioning that because this film is going to be launched on Netflix on June 14th, and just in the last few days there's been a lot, well, actually the last few weeks, but especially in the last few days, because there's going to be an announcement on Friday of all the June releases, and we'll be in that list. I mean, we won't maybe be the most important thing on the list, but we'll be on the list. The hope is that in Sweden, this will get the Swedish population much more aware of how big a problem this is. A lot of these people think this is something that used to happen a long time ago, and it doesn't happen anymore, and that's completely wrong. And so we're really hoping that this will put pressure on the migration policy to make it easier for these families to be treated with the humanitarian concerns so that they can actually get the residency they need for their children to be well. That's our primary goal.
And then, like we said earlier, in general, we're hoping that when people watch the film, they'll be able to put a face on what they think is a statistic or an article in the paper or some political slogan. These are real people, and with their own personal stories of trauma who are suffering direct consequences. Whether it's like they're coming from El Salvador or trying to go to Australia. Wherever it may be, these are all people, generally fleeing trauma, even if it's a long-term trauma, having their society collapse and they can't survive, or whether it's a particular trauma of being, beaten up and raped or whatever it might be. These are real people, and we think that whatever the story is, what we hope will happen is the viewer's going to look at that and say, that's like these people here or these people there or these people we heard about. It's real people. I mean, this is not just like Sweden, and it's not just statistics. These are real people, and that's why we actually didn't want to have, for example, the doctors getting into the intricacies of the theories, because you're going to have impact, I think, with an emotional story, and we wanted to make it an emotional story. And we thought if we started getting into this other stuff, it undercuts the emotion. And we actually had an archival sequence that we cut and put in the film. We took it out because it just sort of made it a different film and took the emotion out. And so, we got rid of it. So we're hoping people can generalize outside of Sweden. And in Sweden, we hope that it'll make people maybe think about the policies that are affecting all these people.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. It was fun to talk to you. Thank you.
I hope it all works out for you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
We're working on it.
Thank you.